Welcome back, and firstly I'd like to thank the people who suggested that I did a video on Đà Nẵng. That video has gone down really well and it's given this channel a real boost which it desperately needed, so thanks very much for that. And I do have plans to visit another couple of border towns. There's Sungai Golok and Padang Besar, but at the moment my ancient car is back in the shop having some oil leaks repaired, so I'm immobile at the moment. And there's some other places I want to go to, but they're closed because of COVID. So those type of videos are just on hold at the moment. And today I decided to tackle another subject, that of the cost of living in Thailand. What is the truth about the cost of living in Thailand? So what is the truth about the cost of living in Thailand? And the truth is that there's no actual answer unless you give me a lot more information. Now, despite this, it doesn't stop people asking the question, and it doesn't stop people trying to give an answer. There are lots of websites and YouTube channels where people attempt to give this answer, and it's really an impossible answer to give. And I tried to explain this to someone on the Quora website, and I didn't think I was being rude, but when I went back into Quora the next time, they told me that I'd been rude for 80% of my answer, and that's certainly not my intention. I mentioned in a previous video that these days it seems every Farang and his dog in Thailand has a YouTube channel, and on each of those YouTube channels there's a video like this trying to describe the cost of living. And some people try to tackle it honestly, but there's one very important issue that they don't cover. I'll cover that later in the video. And at the other end of the scale, there are people who are quite dishonest, and they give misleading information. And you might wonder why people do this, and I can only think of two reasons. The first is that we live in a kind of Instagram age now, where people want to portray their life online in a way that doesn't represent their actual life. They want to make it seem that their life is a lot better than it actually is. So for the people living in Thailand, you know, it's a life of hedonism. They just sit in a swimming pool all day, sipping cocktails, and this lifestyle is really cheap, you know, so you can live in Thailand for $400, $500, $600 a month. It's just not true. And the other reason, I think, is that a lot of people rely on income from social media to survive in Thailand. And with YouTube, for instance, the income is dependent on view time. So if a lot of people watch your videos, you get more money. And people will stop at nothing to get more views, you know, clickbait. And if they can sell a dream, then they'll get more views. And many people have been to Thailand and sort of gone home. They might not have much money, and it will be a dream to live in Thailand, but they don't think they can afford it. And if someone makes a video saying, oh yeah, you can live in Thailand on just, you know, $500 or $600 a month, they sell that dream, and then they get more views, and then they get more income. They're being selfish. It's just about their income, but it could actually mislead other people and cause other people to have some quite big problems in the future. What some people do when describing the cost of living in Thailand is just to tell people about their own personal expenses. And that's fine, but we're all different and we have different expenses. So later in the video, I'll tell you about some of my expenses, but those things won't apply to someone who's just coming to Thailand because my lifestyle is quite different. So I won't talk too much about specifics, I'll talk more in general. And Thailand is quite a unique country. A couple of years ago, there were some reports that said Thailand has the biggest wealth gap in the world. And what that means is that there are some very poor people and there are some extremely rich people. And rich Thais are not rich just by Thai standards, they're rich by world standards. So if you have very little money in Thailand, you can get by, you can survive. You know, you can find a room for 1,500 baht a month, which is less than 50 US dollars. And if you're very rich, you can have the best lifestyle that, you know, that money can buy. And there are apartments for rent in Bangkok, you know, for 250,000 baht a month, which is around $8,000. And no doubt there are more expensive apartments. And that's the same with everything in Thailand. You know, with food, you can get street food. You can buy a plate of rice or noodles for 30 baht. And there are Michelin-starred restaurants in Bangkok where you can pay a fortune for a meal. With healthcare, you can go to a public hospital or a small clinic and get treated quite cheaply. Or you can go to a luxury hospital like the Bum Rung Rat, which is like a 5-star hotel, and get, you know, the best possible treatment. So it doesn't really matter how much money you've got. You'll find a way to survive in Thailand. But the thing is, do you just want to survive? Do you just want to live like a poor Thai? And that's not the reason why foreigners come to Thailand. They don't want to live like poor Thais. They don't just want to survive. They want to have a better lifestyle. So you need to make sure that your income is enough to give you the lifestyle you want. And what I see on you know, these YouTube channels and websites that tell people, you know, how cheaply they can live in Thailand, is that people will just pick things that are used by very poor Thais just to make the cost of living seem really cheap. But in reality, most foreigners would not want to live that way. For some reason, a lot of people mention haircuts when they want to illustrate how cheap it is to live in Thailand. And yes, haircuts are cheap in Thailand. And when I was back in the UK a couple of years ago, I was quite shocked at how expensive haircuts are in the UK. But there's a lot more to the cost of living in Thailand than just getting a cheap haircut. So what we've covered so far is really obvious. In Thailand, there is something for everyone's budget, and you need to make sure that you've got enough money for the lifestyle that you want to lead. And that's really obvious, and that's covered in all the other videos. Now I'm going to go on to the big issue that I don't hear anyone talk about. And that is, when you go to Thailand, how long do you plan on staying in Thailand? You know, are you just a gap year student who's planning to go to Thailand for a year to teach English? Are you traveling around and you just plan to stay in Thailand for a year or two? Or, like me, are you going to Thailand and that's where you intend sort of staying for the rest of your life? Because you as a person will change. You will develop, your needs will change, your values will change, everything will change. And I think that's something that a lot of young people don't seem to realise. I didn't realise myself. So what might be useful is if I just explain my own life a little bit. And that might help. So I came to Thailand when I was 42. I'm now 60. This is my 18th year in Thailand. And when I came, and for a long time before that, I wasn't interested in relationships, marriage, families, anything like that. All I wanted to do was to travel to new places, and there was nothing I enjoyed more than just going to a new place, not knowing anything about the place I was going to, finding somewhere to stay, dumping my gear, and just going out around the streets exploring with a camera. That was all I wanted in life. And when I got to Thailand, I had to work for a few years, mainly because of the visa situation. It's difficult staying in Thailand if you're less than 50 because you can't get a retirement visa, and if you're not married because you can't get a marriage visa. So I worked mainly for a visa. And when I got to 50, I planned to retire. At 50, I could get a retirement visa, and that was the age that I also started collecting my private pension, so I had a bit more money coming in. And the plan was just to have a small room in Thailand, just to keep my gear mainly, and maybe spend a month or two in Thailand. And for the rest of the year, just go around the various countries in this region. Maybe spend a month or 2 months in Vietnam, Cambodia, Laos, Philippines, wherever. That's all I wanted to do, but for the rest of my life. When I almost reached 50, something happened. I don't know why. For the first time in my life, I started feeling loneliness, and I'd never felt that before. I'd always travelled by myself before, and the loneliness didn't bother me at all. And all of a sudden, it just hit me. And I then lost my desire to do all this travelling. And it was a really strong feeling. It was something that I couldn't overcome. And I got involved with a girl that I got really hung up on, and that just made the situation worse. She wasn't interested, so I knew I was wasting my time, but I knew by then that I really wanted to settle down. And then I met the girl that's now my wife. She got pregnant quite quickly. We got married, and then things changed completely, and that included the amount of money that I had to spend. So I'll talk a little bit about that now. Of course, I'm not saying that if you come to Thailand as a single person that you have to get married or you will get married. Of course you don't. Whenever I go to Bangkok or the tourist resorts with my family, I always see a lot of foreigners, obviously on their own, and we tend to stay at the better hotels and eat at the better restaurants, and they're going to these same places, so they're having a good lifestyle on their own. And if you're genuinely happy doing that, fine. It certainly makes managing your funds a lot easier if you haven't got people who depend on you. What I'm trying to say is that things change, and these changes might come quite sort of unexpectedly. And when you first get to Thailand, it's just like being on an extended vacation, but you don't have to come home. So everything's really exciting and new, and that sort of keeps your mind occupied, and you want to eat Thai food all the time. And the longer you're in Thailand, the more things change. So like for the food, for example, at first it's all cheap Thai food. And then I found I started missing food from home a lot more after a few years. And Western food isn't cheap in Thailand. If you go to good restaurants that serve Western food, they're quite expensive. And even buying Western food in the supermarkets is quite expensive. And this thing about being on your own, at first it was fine, and then the longer I was here, the more I didn't want to be on my own. So don't underestimate this. If you're going to Thailand like with a long-term plan, don't underestimate how things might change in the future. And what you normally find is that as things change, life gets more and more expensive. So when I was single, I stayed in quite a nice apartment. That cost me 6,500 baht a month. I'm out in the provinces in Hat Yai. I found a really nice place a few years ago that was better than where I stayed. That's 10,000 baht a month. So out in the provinces, you can find a really nice place for 10,000. It's more expensive in Bangkok. I watched a video recently about a 10,000 baht a month apartment in Bangkok, and there wasn't enough room to swing the proverbial cat. In Bangkok, you're going to need to pay 15,000-20,000 to get a decent place. But in the provinces, you can get a really nice place sort of between 6 and 10,000. When I first met my wife, we moved to a rented house, and that was really cheap. That was just 4,500 baht a month. But that came with absolutely nothing, so we had to put the furniture in there. And because it was a sort of way under my budget, I also paid to have it decorated, and I had quite a lot done to it, which is not what Thais would do to a rented house, but my situation was a bit different. Then we had our first child, and that's when things really started to change. Shortly after we moved into the rented house, we were struck by the biggest flood in Hat Yai's history, and it really wasn't a nice experience, and I decided to buy a house. And one of the primary considerations about the house was that it was in an area that didn't flood. And I've read all the comments from foreigners saying that, if you buy a property in Thailand, you're an idiot. But I'm married with kids, and I want to make sure that when I'm no longer around, my wife and kids will be okay. So buying the house will give them a bit more security. Anyway, that's when the expense really started, because the house was 6 million. Then, because we had a child, I needed to have a car. Thais do carry around very small children on motorbikes, but Thailand is the most dangerous country in the world for motorbike accidents, and it's really not something I want to do. So I bought a car. And because our house was sort of out of the central area, my wife needed a car, so that was another 400,000 baht. And then there are all the ongoing costs. So I'll just go through a few of those with you. So car insurance on 2 cars, it's about 10,000 baht a year each. Then there's this Por or Bor, which is the mandatory government insurance. That's only like 645 a year. Road tax on my car is 3,384 a year. It's a bit cheaper on my wife's car. My car is old, and I've every year I have to pay, I don't know, 40,000 or so baht in repairs. So the car's in the shop at the moment for another repair. Thai say to me, well, why don't you just go and buy a new car? As if it's nothing. But the kind of car I would need will be over 1 million baht. So at the moment, it's better for me just to spend 40 or 50,000 a year in repairs than buy a new car. School fees. We have 2 kids, and when I was at school in England, the state education system was fine. My parents have 3 children. Never paid a penny in school fees, and we had decent educations. It's not really the same in Thailand, and you do need to pay out for private school fees. So at the moment I'm paying about 112,000 baht every year for school fees. On top of that, there are books, school books and uniforms for the kids, which is about another 10,000 a year. And there's a big thing in Thailand about extra tuition, like tutoring. All of the Thai kids do it. I didn't want our kids doing it, but because my wife was Thai, she's really insistent they do it. She's scared if they don't do it, they're going to fall behind. And that's not cheap. That's costing us around 5,000 baht a month, or 60,000 baht a year. House insurance is about 12,000 a year. We live in a sort of gated community, and there's a maintenance charge. We've got security guards, street lighting, cleaning up. That cost me about 20,000 a year. And then health insurance, which is another sort of biggie. The public hospitals, the doctors, nurses try to do a good job, but they're just overrun. These places are where all the sort of poor Thais go, and it always very, very busy. So really you want to go to private hospitals and you need insurance. And mine's not too bad. For me it's 19,000, my wife 9,000, and for the kids about 11,000 each. And that's actually quite cheap because I've been with this company for a long time. A couple of years ago, the premium went up quite steeply, like two years on the trot. So I started to look around at other companies, and the quotes I was getting were crazy. It's like 250,000 baht a year. So what I pay now, so around sort of 55, 60,000 is pretty good. Another thing to think about is exchange rates. If you're living in Thailand on an income from abroad. When I first got to Thailand, the exchange rate was about 70 baht to the UK pound, and then it kept rising and it almost got to like 75. After the global financial crisis, or 2008, 2009, it went down to around 60. Then it kept dropping. Just before the Brexit referendum, it was around 52. And then after the UK decided to leave the EU, it dropped about 10 points almost overnight. And the lowest it got to was about 38. So during the time I've been in Thailand, I've seen the exchange rate almost halve. Now it's back up to about 44. But what that means is that if you've got an income from abroad and the exchange rate halves, then you've only got half the amount of money. So that can make a big difference. And if you're only in Thailand for a year teaching, you haven't got to worry about visas and immigration. You know, your employer should do it all for you. If you're in Thailand for the long term, then you'll need to think about visas, and there are monetary requirements. You know, if you've got a retirement visa, you'll either have to show 800,000 baht in a Thai bank account, or an income of 65,000 baht a month. And if you've got a marriage visa, it's 400k in a Thai bank or 40k a month. So they are other things you need to think about, you know, if you're here for the long term. This video has been really difficult to make. I wish it was easy. I wish it was straightforward and I could just give you a figure. You know, this is how much it costs to live in Thailand. But you can't do it. There are so many variables and we're all so different. And I really want to stress the point of change. You know, how we develop in life, how we change in life, how our values change. And this can come unexpectedly and quite quickly. So my income has been the same for quite a long time. And for a single person in Thailand on that income, especially with the exchange rate as it was a few years ago, I could live like a lord. You know, I had a really easy, comfortable lifestyle and really no financial restrictions. And within a year, because of the way that my life changed and all the extra responsibilities that I took on, and because of the way the exchange rate dropped, I went from being very flush with money to money becoming a bit of a struggle. So this can happen quickly and unexpectedly, and it's not something that you should underestimate. I've nearly finished the video, and I'm not sure whether what I've said has come across as useful information or just rambling on my part. As I said before, this has been a very difficult video to make because there are so many variables and there are just no easy answers. If you've got any comments or questions, please leave them below and I'll get back to you, and I'll try to be honest. So thank you for watching, and there'll be more videos soon.